All right. Well, thanks all. And thank you, Nettie.
Thank you.
So we'll try to, I know it's been a long day. It's been a lot of stuff. It's good, but I know there's receptions and things. So what we want to try to do is we each have PowerPoints. And we've all said we're going to try to keep them under 10 minutes. I think Kurt actually stole a couple of my minutes, so I'm clean up. And with that, we really want to give an overview of our view on Alaska's potential and why we put potential in there, because it is only potential at this stage for development of minerals. So this is going to hopefully be sort of a TED Talk style, and I'll let the panelists say a little bit more about them when they speak. But of course, Liz Conejo, Rick Van Nieuwenhuizen, and Kurt Freeman. I do that okay, Rick? I've only known Rick for 40 years or something. Almost like a fun. Yeah. So let's see. With that, I think first up is going to be Rick, and then Liz, and then Kurt. Here's a slide thing. And just real high level, we're going to talk about, and thank you, previous panels, unless you teed us up perfectly. We're going to talk about plan policies, the needs for advertising, capital needs, problem with middle cycles. We'll have an answer for you on that, Bob. Time frame. What we will not talk about, though, is really addressing the processing side of things, which we know is important and very critical, but we're not really going to touch that. So without further ado, unless I missed anything, you guys, let's go.
I'm going to start with a slide that Kurt showed 10 years ago. And I think it's appropriate still, not just for our need to address climate change, but also our need to recognize that you can't address climate change without money. And we're going to kind of zero in on the net zero by 2050 that's the target. That's what everybody's been talking about. Very high level all around the world. I'm going to focus from an Alaska point of view. What can we do about it? The first thing we need to have is a plan. I haven't heard anybody talk about a plan yet. So we're going to spend a little bit of time. We need infrastructure. That's been talked a lot. We need power. We've tried to generate green power in this state with the dam. I remember as a kid. So that's been around a long time. I think we need a lot of education. I'm not convinced that people really get it. And so I'm going to spend some time on that. We need capital. We need a lot of capital. We need incentives to spend that capital. And I'm going to point out that this is going to be very inflationary. It already is. We're already sensing it and feeling it from the inflationary pressures that we're currently existing. So I'm going to talk about the need for mining is obvious. A lot more electric vehicles coming on stream, and they all need copper. It's shifted from this sort of a slope to this sort of a slope, so it's an increasing amount of copper. And I focus on copper because it's the most important metal in an electrification process, and all the other metals will follow along with copper in terms of their need. I want to address the myth that we can get there with recycling. That's been talked about. Every time I have a conversation with the anti-mining lobby, that's the first thing they say. Well, we need to recycle. It isn't going to get us to net zero in 2050. We use 27 million tons of copper annually now. We're going to use more because you saw those curves steep. We already recycle 32%. So 8.7 million tons is recycled copper on an annual basis. But copper has a sort of a shelf life of 5 to 30 years. When you do the math on that, that means we're already recycling 80% of the copper in use. So you're not going to get there. Recycling is not a solution. Should we recycle? Absolutely. Do we do it well now? No, we kind of suck at it. There's not a very good recycling processing. There's no recycling processing facility here in Alaska. So, and focusing the attention on Alaska, we need this, but it's not a solution. So to kind of put some just simple numbers on things that highlight this fact. An electric vehicle battery in a Tesla weighs 1,000 pounds. That requires 500,000 pounds of materials to make, mining materials to make 250. 400 million electric vehicles, or sorry, there's 4 million vehicles in North America, Mexico, US, and Canada. So you just do some simple math. Over the next 30 years, we have to mine 2 trillion tons of material. And to put it in more mining context, 100 billion tons. That hasn't been done ever in the history of the world. And then you have Europe, which is about the same number of vehicles. Then you've got China, which is at least twice that many vehicles. And you've got India that's at least twice again that many minerals. So tons of minerals. So again, recycling doesn't work. We need a lot of mining. We need a plan to get there. Regulatory processes at the federal level are what are hindering our ability to deliver metals, critical metals. And most metals are critical. We're going to talk about that some more. We've talked about infrastructure. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. That's a big piece that's missing in Alaska. Education is, in my opinion, if we can come out with one thing in this conference, is that we need to educate people. And I'm going to, next couple of slides are going to talk about that. Reports and Governor Michalski talked about this. We've been talking about this forever. We've got lots of potential for non-carbon sources of energy up here, but we just talk about it. We haven't built one thing in all the time since I was in high school. So education. So here's a slide I want to underscore where the problem is. Investors don't get it. This is the Vatican. This is the Catholic Church. They have a $33 billion fund that they invest in. They're not quite Elon Musk, but that's a lot of money. They just recently, a month ago, said, here are the things we're going to invest in, and here are the things we aren't going to invest. So they're not going to invest in prostitution, pornography, and the manufacture of contraceptives. Okay, it's the Catholic Church, got it. They're like to invest in things that are going to promote a cleaner environment and that are going to clean tech and clean energy and that better the lives of people. And I read that, I was like, cool, that's mining. We pay some of the highest wages in the state. But then you read on, and it goes, and we're going to discourage investment in alcohol, oil, gas, nuclear, and all mining. And the Catholic Church is very active in a large part of the world in discouraging mining projects. So, and yet, in the same statement, they want a green energy future, effectively. So there's a disconnect presumably they've got smart people working there managing $33 billion. At the people level, Gammon Fest started out as an anti-pebble jamboree. Music, like music, probably wouldn't mind going. It has now turned into an anti-mining fest. Every mining project, there's a speaker that gets up during intermission and talks about all the evils of mining. It's sponsored by a group called Alaskans Know Climate Change. If you go to their website, there's lots of discussion about needing to transition to a green energy future. Again, disconnect. You need copper, you need all these metals to achieve that, but there's not the connection there. So I think we still need a lot of education. And I think we have to have the political will to convince people that we can mine it environmentally responsibly, and we can have fish, and we can have caribou, and we can have mining. Last point I want to make is on, kind of gets back to education, and I know Liz is going to talk more about this, but there's 50 metals on the critical metals. I think about them and color coded them, because we don't mine for cesium, we don't mine for gallium. Those are byproduct metals that come along for the ride. We need to. We look at that, and the first thing I notice is, well, copper's not on the list. Silver's not on the list. Solar panels require gobs of silver. If we're going to have solar panels, you need them. But none of the metals work without copper. So where the hell is copper? Why isn't it on the list? It's just like wow. So we go mine for the main metals, things like aluminum, nickel, copper. The other metals, the byproduct metals and the co-product metals, can potentially come out of those materials. We definitely need more research to identify where they are, but they're in tailings facilities. They're in waste pile. They're in things that, because we didn't have technology or we weren't paying attention or didn't know that we needed them, they're there. They've been mined, so there's a lot of invested dollars already to get them out. Platinum group metals are sort of a special group. They require special processing to separate out the platinum group metals and rare earths. As Bob said, they're not rare. What's rare is that they can be concentrated and then you can separate the damn things to actually make useful things out of them. So we shouldn't think about critical metals the same way. They're all different. The main thing for the primary metals is get the permitting sorted out so we can actually know what we need to get permitted and know how long it's going to take so investors can judge where to put their capital, because without the capital, it isn't going to happen. Thanks.
Wow. Thanks. That was 8:59. Okay, this isn't a race, but thank you with that.
Pressure's
Liz.
on now.
Yeah,
Am I ready?
you're ready.
Okay. Thank
We're ready
you.
for you.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Lance, for inviting me to the panel. Liz Cornejo, I am a geologist. I have a master's degree in geology. And like others have spoken about on the panel today, I sort of ended up in mining. It wasn't the plan. And ended up in exploration and development projects here in Southeast Alaska for the most part of my career. Although I've worked in Ontario, Alberta, British Columbia, Idaho, but mostly Alaska since 2007. And have yet to see a product of mine come into production. So I wanted to bring that up, that the question mark is there. There's exploration and development, but will any of those projects turn into a mine? What is the future going to look like in Alaska 10 or 20 years from now, beyond the existing mines? And there's a saying in the industry that mines are where you find them. Mother Nature put them there. We can't choose where they show up. We can't choose if they're close to infrastructure or close to sensitive environmental areas or close to communities. Mines just are where you find them. And mines don't just happen, they are made. It is an uphill process. There's nothing easy about finding and developing a mine. And I think that's been shown here today over and over again with the lack of progress since the same conference 10 years ago, as far as putting new mines into action. So there has been progress, but we haven't actually opened up new mines. And one of those things that, as far as mines are where you find them, I think it's worth remembering that half of Alaska, just under half of Alaska, is closed to mineral entry. So the state is large, but cut it in half, and that's what's available for explorers to work with. And then also the comment about, proximity to infrastructure and such too. So there's not a lot that's actually viable for the low-hanging fruit for finding something and putting something into production. And the mines, they don't just happen because it needs people. And there's been a lot of talk today about policies and investment and research and technology, but all of that is really powered by people. And so the one other thing I have here is mining is about water, water, water. That comes up a lot. It's about water research, water permitting, water litigation. But I also think it's about people, people, and people. It's the people on the ground, the boots on the ground people who are out there drilling the drill holes, that are cooking the meals for the camps people. It's about the journalists who are trying to report on these in different communities. It's about the teachers and educators that are out there trying to communicate what we do with minerals, how a rock becomes your stapler. That's kind of a mystery to a lot of people. So it's about people. And for my career, I've spent most of my time talking with people. I talk with regulators, I talk with tribes, I talk with educators, I talk with people who do site visits, I talk with investors. Most of my career has ended up being in the space where I interact with people. And some of it's our own staff, workforce development. And so I wanted to bring up the concept of management. A couple of people talked about it earlier, about how it's not a yes or no question. It's often just how something is going to move through the permitting process. And that's a management issue to resolve. And so the same approach can be taken to safety management, environmental management, social management, economic sustainability, and values management. Values can change over time as well. And when you've got an exploration project that's still still in exploration for 15 or 20 years, values can change over that time as well. So I wanted to bring in the concept of just managing impacts or managing risk. And this is something that if people have worked with health and safety risk management, it's a typical matrix as far as the likelihood of an event happening on one axis and the consequence on the other. So you want to bring something that's potentially dangerous from sort of a highly catastrophic impact or a really probable accident down to something that's less probable for happening and lower consequence. So am I going to lose an appendage and bleed out, or is it a paper cut that I get once a year? So in health and safety management, we look at ways to avoid, minimize, or mitigate those risks. It's a risk reduction process. And the same can be applied to environmental and social impacts as well. And I like to remind people that impacts are not always negative. Impacts can be positive. Sometimes it's referred to impacts and benefits, but it's also just impacts. And so that same slide can be flipped around on its head. And if you can identify a positive impact, then you want to increase the likelihood of that and increase the consequence. You know, if there is a mineral exploration project, how can we increase local hire? How can we increase the length of that local hire, the number of people included in that local hire? So when looking at these mineral projects, for me, I'd like to look at it as a holistic approach. If you break it down into pieces, yes, there can be issues and obstacles in each piece, but to look at it holistically as far as what are the risks, what are the benefits, how can we minimize and mitigate all of those things to minimize the negative impacts and protect things from catastrophic consequence or enhance the benefits. And sometimes that's through the permitting process. Other times it's through company policies, through community policies and just values and sharing. It doesn't have to be a formal permitting process to work on these things. And they all go through the same process, whether it's an environmental impact or a social impact, you got to scope it out. What is it that's important? What are we valuing? Mining is often about water, 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 because we all value water. It's something that people hold dear, but you have to scope it out. Okay, we value the water. Where does it occur? Is it this watershed or this watershed? Or if it's a social impact, if it's a traffic impact, you know, is it just this neighborhood or is it the whole neighborhood, the whole town? So you set up a baseline, you identify the potential impacts, you look at ways to avoid, minimize, mitigate, enhance if it's a positive one, or adapt, and you accept things. And I think Senator Murkowski said it well, at the end of the day, we do need to dig holes in the ground and those will have impacts. They can't be completely avoided. It's not a magical situation, but also to recognize that those impacts also have a tremendous amount of benefits for national security, for health, for education, for economic development, for our society as well. Just treat it holistically. And to close, really, one thing I like to think of too is what is the impact of not mining in Alaska? We can think of probably many reasons people don't want to open up a mine, or potential environmental damage, potential environmental risk, social risk, but also what is the impact of not mining in Alaska? Does it decrease our national security? Does it decrease our economic development opportunities? Does it decrease our educational benefits? So with that, I think there are ways to work to find the balance, to find a shared value, a common purpose. But really it comes down to people, motivating people to enter the industry, to have new students enter the industry, to have collaboration between people. I often talk to people who aren't even really interested in having a discussion. And so it becomes difficult to have a discussion for managing potential impacts if there's not the interest in actually getting into production for a mine. And so we can talk about things, we can research things, but if not a common purpose and motivated people to push projects into development, then I don't know if we're going to be in a different place in 10 years.
Thank you. And on the people theme, I might have failed to mention why we're trying to blast through this is to leave some time for you all to ask questions. So you're not off the hook. So be thinking of things. There you go with that.
Very good.
Please.
Thank you, Lance. Settle back. I got about an hour here. Get a beer. Just cool. I'm just kidding. Okay. I like this picture because it's got everything we've talked about today, even though you don't think it has anything to do with mining. It's a road. It's made of gravel. There's a truck on it made of steel and a bunch of other cool metals. It's hauling rock. There's an oil pipeline sitting right next door to it. That is Alaska. I also wanted to, little resistor is not doing the thing here. It's forward. Go. Okay. Oh, maybe back up a second. It's not new. This is from 1941. This is from the State Geological Survey's website. This is strategic minerals in Alaska from 1941. And if you look down in the corner, I've blown up the elements. A lot of the elements that we're talking about right now are on that list. So this is not, we're not plowing new. I looked at this, I decided we had split up what we were going to talk about into a couple of different prospects or ideas. I decided to take a SWOT approach here: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and look at a couple of things: market dynamics, access and infrastructure, seasonality, and messaging. And so I want to show you what I came up with for these four elements of a very much more complex story. Our strengths, pretty sad, and panicked me too when I first looked at it. So I had to stretch it a bit. We do have access to the Pacific Rim. That is a strength. In fact, it's 4,200 kilometers if anyone's counting. But what the point is here is when we get the opportunities, we have the opportunities here that can be turned into strengths. We don't have them right now. We have the opportunities. About our weaknesses, we got plenty of those. We are on a higher cost curve. It's pretty clear. We have, if we're talking about SCMs, we are talking about smaller volume metal production, and those things tend to be much more price volatile. Marginal prospects tend to struggle, and sometimes they don't survive. Access and infrastructure, we got lots of air only, but not a lot of roads. Everybody's talked about that. We've got a few deep water ports, limited grid-based electricity, and we'll come back to that. All of those things mitigate against mining and toward deposits that are higher grade on average and at a lower cost on average. So that's the top end. That's the creme de la creme of mining prospects. The tough thing to find. Seasonality. Obviously, there are things you can only do during the summer season, and particularly the exploration and early development sectors are very much more heavily affected by this. But there are things that you can only do in the wintertime, as we've seen on the North Slope. There are things that are better done that way. One of the other messaging things that comes across quite large, and people have talked about it, the industry has bypassed Alaska when it comes to SCMs. Even though we have support from our legislatures, as this venue shows today, we have organizations like ADA that help us with development that we otherwise could not afford. Those things have largely gone unnoticed out in the public domain. Now, opportunities here, we clearly have the mineral base, 2,500 underexplored SCM prospects and a 7,500 mineral database. Many of those have never been explored before. Some of them have metals that we didn't even know were worth anything up until a very recent time. Access and infrastructure. We have a road waiting after 7 years of permitting. Road waiting to be permitted that will create 3 different critical minerals: copper, zinc, and cobalt. That's the Ambler Road. We can't let that sit and do nothing. We have to stop removing lands. That's something people don't talk much about. We continually remove lands from mineral entry in Alaska. And at the same time as we're doing that, we should be looking at the high SCM potential within conservation units and taking selected looks at places that should be reopened or at least reinvestigated by state and federal agencies. The threats. These are the ones that are out there. Sometimes we'll talk about a little bit here in just a bit. Both cartels and monopolies exist for a reason. There was tin, lead, zinc cartels that were in existence. There clearly is a monopoly on things like REEs and platinum group metals in particular. Those things tend to make putting small CM projects into production quite a bit more risky. Access and infrastructure, clearly we can't get to them. As somebody pointed out, you can haul gold in an airplane and you can deliver it to FedEx, but you can't do that with concentrates. You can't do that with the bigger concentrate mines. Seasonality, there are things that the supply chain since COVID hit has not helped us at all. And they have turned 1 season programs into 2 or sometimes 3 season programs, further lengthening an already slow and lengthy process in the mineral industry. We can't let that stand. And again, we've fallen well behind our peers. We only have 2 really active SCM projects right now. Both of them are over 10 years old. They're already 10 years on the march. We have to be able to create that environment here that reaches an advanced stage in a quicker period of time without taking risk to the environment and the social environment. Now, oops, what happened there? There we go. I'm going to skip over that one because this is the one I want to talk about. We've heard this mine mentioned before. This is Mountain Pass, California. Picture from 2011 when they went back into production. This was the U.S.'s lone and largest, one of the largest producers of REEs in the world from 1950s right up until 2001. Closed for both economic and technical reasons for about 10 years. A company called Molycorp took it over, went public in 2010, and plans to dramatically not only produce REEs, but produce value-added products through a series of subsidiaries they own. And their stock price quickly went from $14 to $77. Things look very bright. About that same period, if you look at the REE prices, you'll see that China started releasing more REEs. They relaxed the import license, is the way they put it, allowing more REEs to come on the market. Higher supply, what's that mean? Price went down. By 2015, Molycorp was bankrupt. And their assets were bought by private purchasers, some of which were Chinese domiciled. And mining was resumed by a company that are doing it right now called MP Materials. And it sells its products to Shenge Resource Holding Company, a partly PRC-owned company. And by the way, Shenge also owns 8% of the outstanding stock of MP Materials. That's what happens when you tangle with a monopoly and you're not ready for it. You get hosed. We talked about byproducts. This is one of my favorites here. A few years ago, China had a 5-year program to use tellurium primarily for solar cells that actually consumed more than the rest of the world's tellurium combined. It was a 5-year program. We've obviously seen that there are byproduct metals, and some of them, including tellurium, in old tailings piles. But there are also other places where, as you can see here at the bottom, Kennecott started a tellurium recovery primary circuit at their Bingham Canyon, a very large copper mine. And as it turns out, worldwide, tellurium is produced mainly as a byproduct of copper smelting in large copper mines. So there are places that you can do it either from the tailings existing. You can also, you can also do it as a primary product of your mine. This is one I like to put. This actually happened. This is not make believe. Let's say you're mining platinum, placer platinum out of Good News Bay, extreme southwestern Alaska. It's been a long time placer platinum producer. Your dozer's broken down and you need some real bolts. You don't need cheap junk, you need grade 9 bolts. They only cost a couple of bucks a piece. You can get them out to Bethel, the nearest sort of hub in that area, for a pretty reasonable price. Getting them from Bethel to the mine site is $1,100 on a single engine airplane. That's what limited infrastructure means in Alaska. And this, I think I'll stop with this one. This is one of my favorites. This is on the left here. That's the Norderol aluminum smelter in of all places, Iceland. And that's aluminum ingot sitting right there. There's several, actually there's more than one aluminum smelter in Iceland. And their electrical power comes from geothermal and from hydro. It's a zero carbon system. And they're having people literally, there are no aluminum mines in Iceland. Everyone ships their raw product to Iceland for smelting there. That's could be Alaska. Who has more geothermal power than we do? Not very many places. I think I will stop right there so we can open up some questions. I have more, but that's okay.
Okay, thank you. And I still get my cut at the, yeah, here we go. I have to keep time. Moderate the moderator.
Yeah,
Thank
there you go. There you go.
Okay. Let's see. How's this work? Keep going. Yep. Okay. Yeah, just a few more slides here to kind of jog people's, whoops. You know, someone doing something over there. Thought process. But the other thing is, and my colleagues here said I probably shouldn't use this because there is good traction on critical and strategic metals, but I actually like to think of these as societal metals, and they really are. I think another theme here you've heard is, we've heard that today. So I won't go through this list of stuff, just jump into it. I can bring, oh, there we go. You know, I always have to have a little Debbie Downer, but Senator Sullivan started with this 10 years ago. I also was at that conference that DNR really put together. It was awesome. In fact, a lot of the playbook, you know, just redone it. There's a lot more progress today. This was a bill passed, and we were all really encouraged. I won't even read that because here we are. Something that did happen the last 10 years, actually 9 years from when I saw the Belt and Road Initiative of China we saw mentioned earlier, has happened. And you know, you heard about it this morning. So they have the long view. Interestingly, I was at Hobo, which is the larger rare earth element deposits. 26 years ago, we were standing at the pit getting a tour, and this transformer blew, and this guy comes over with an oxen cart with his tools to fix it. No kidding, you know, but even then they had the long-term plan. They knew where to go. So more on that later too. Of course, there's a lot of new executive orders out today, and I think we're all aware of those. That's why we're here today. So that's some other good progress. How do we convert that into action? Another thing I always like to frame is, besides all this other stuff, the need for all these cool metals, population alone is just going exponential. And so the red here shows that. Also like the copper and zinc have been around a long time. I think as some people have noted today that here looking ahead the next 20, 50 years, we're going to need more copper and too than we have all those other 7,000 plus years. So, you know, that's really critical that people are driving this demand. It's not just something out there in the cloud. Another kind of fun graphic is this slide. I don't know the difference. Anybody know the cell phone time? Maybe 15 years, say. But if you look at the white space in the periodic table, 15, 10, 20, I don't know. What's the difference between those two cell phones? Point being, still cell phones. And there's about 40 more elements in today's phone than even there. So even when we have technology, it's going to keep ramping up metal intensity, usage intensity. And this one, now we can spend some time on this one going through each of those lines, of course. You know, I think we've hammered the how long things take. Bob mentioned 18 to 20 years. I'd argue that's actually been for the mines that are in production today. And now that's kind of the world average. And Alaska's examples today, look at Donlin, look at we've blown this out of the water. So things do take a long time, as shown by the little kid at the bottom growing into adult. If you're lucky, if there's a kid today, they might have a job in a mine in the future. And then the other point being just how many prospects need to be drilled to even become a mine. You know, less than 1% to 7% of drilled prospects actually become a mine in the future. And then there's been mentioned the Ambler Road, of course, accessing this Ambler District, Arctic, other deposits. This is from 1968, cool headline. And the first exploration there was in the late 1940s. So, perspective too, maybe someday. This slide is for Bob Luffler. I think this is how you can buy your new car. So we talked a lot about a lot of the dynamics and markets that was mentioned here. You know, I think though it's only been peripherally talked about today. You have the metal markets. The red lines in blue on top are going back 100 years. That's copper and zinc in 2015 dollars. So it's cyclic. Also, something we were talking about at lunch is the EISs and feasibility studies have a shelf life for their data. And then you get that along with the metal cycle. So then the cycle goes down, you can't raise money, so you can't explore, or you get a lawsuit. and it puts time on, then all of a sudden, even if you can go forward, your data, according to an EIS or the feasibility, has to be redone. So you get in this pretty vicious cycle. And just that was kind of the takeaway of this. But important point about metal cycles is, you know, they're roughly 6 to 10 years. And I started thinking about it since we're here in Fairbanks and Interior. You know, lynx rabbit cycles are 8 to 11 years. So there you go, Bob. Just if you start predicting metal prices best based on rabbit and lynx, you're there
Just as well.
just as well. Oh, I turned this off there. Got to talk about Red Dog, of course. It is now, as was mentioned, America's largest critical minerals mine. And to highlight again the point that it's germanium, but you would not mine germanium there. The other thing is just the crazy grade. People are talking about the Red Dog model, which is awesome from everything that economics, the social side, but you know, it's out of this universe, even a global type of a world-class deposit. It's just, you know, people remember when it started, it was 24% combined zinc and lead in an open pit with no strip. And there's mines today that are underground at 6%. So that's back to the Alaska factor. We are doing a little work with School of Mines, Colorado School of Mines, between Red Dog and NANA and them, looking at tailings and opportunities for reprocessing some of the, or not reprocessing, just seeing if there is opportunity for some of the CSMs in the tailings. And then just a couple more slides and I'll be right with the rest of these guys in timing is, this is kind of neat. It's hard to read. Ernst & Young does a top 10 list every year. And at the highest risk they showed this year is ESG basically. But I think we heard, you know, very clearly today, that's for Alaska, not really a risk. I think that's an opportunity because we do it right here. However, we also talked about the need for investment. And when that comes in, that's what investors are looking at. They're seeing how tough it is to do things. I think the other factor talking about REEs or critical strategic minerals is also investors aren't used to these kind of metals. They might be base metals, gold and so forth. So there's some people who know eventually if the price goes up, they'll make money, but you don't know that in REEs if you don't know the markets and these kind of opaque markets. On the top there, their lowest risk is productivity. And I was talking with Kurt about this too, that really that should be higher because it's that translates to low cost mines and that's tons and grade. A lot of the mines that are being operated or worked on in Alaska are high grade because that's what you have to pay for the infrastructure. So that's also, I would argue, a pretty high risk. And then just to sort of sum up here, I think we talked about a lot of these things, but to reach these goals, we're behind the curve, sure. We're not the metal production, even if these projects could be permitted in the pipeline today, we're not ready to meet them. We talked about the non-open market, you know, metals, these boutique metals, I'll call them. And if they're not byproducts, it's really tough to bring them along. Because there's frankly no economic reason for a mining company to go out and even just mine cobalt in Alaska, I'll throw out for sake of argument. We do have the resource potential, but back to that, we need the plan. And we're going to need some federal policies and structures. I think we talked about that to kind of harmonize the needs, the executive orders with the markets and investment. And I think the panel we were talking how I don't think we're for subsidies and such, but in a way, when we're looking ahead at REEs and critical strategic metals, you may really need government intervention at some level to buy a stockpile or to buy a certain amount of metal, because it's just, there's no reason right now in the market space for a mining company to go after a lot of these, frankly. So that's, I know, kind of downer to end on right there, but I think it's really important because we get all excited about all the potential, but a lot of it's just not economic unless we change the paradigm, and that might be less of a market-driven economy that the US, we're all really like, capital system, versus China, where they're going to say, we're just going to do it because it's in the interest of national security.
Can I jump
Thanks.
in on
Yep.
that? I'm just, it was mentioned that, I think Steve McGordy talked about gallium and how China basically just controls that market. The Ambler Mining District has a third critical metal, which is gallium. Now, we don't know much about it, but it occurs in the bornite there. And you could, to your point, Lance, we're not going to go do a bunch of research and figure out how to extract gallium at this point. We actually just need the road so we can build and develop high quality mines there. But there could be, as you say, incentive put in place to say, okay, well, we know there's gallium there. Let's spend some dollars, whether it's structure or offtake or whatever it is that from a DoD standpoint, if there's money for that, spend it there and figure out how to extract what that resource potential is and how to extract it. And we're not, industry is not going to spend a lot of dollars on that, especially when investors know that you can just have the rug pulled out from underneath you from China. If gallium's like critical, let's do something specific for gallium. But otherwise, if we don't build the Ambler Road, none of those metals matter. We can't get at them.
Maybe we can just go from Kurt back down and then open it up. We do have.
Yeah, we have any questions from the audience? I'd love to
Yeah.
involve the audience a little more
So-
here.
Could be like Price is Right. We can start
Yeah.
doing, what's the
Yeah.
price of
Start
neodymium?
yelling.
We do have some people who are listening to the live stream, so if you want
Guy
to
back
ask a
there.
question, wait, you see someone?
Got somebody right back there.
Oh.
Steve?
Oh, Steve. Oh, anybody else?
We-
Anybody else?
Yeah, thanks. I'd just like to explore that point a little bit more about the research that needs to be done to support byproduct production of these metals, because there's mines all across the nation that are putting some of these minerals through their mills. And, what does the panel think is a good approach to stimulate the production and recovery and availability of those commodities as they're currently being mined but not recovered?
I can tell you right now, it's dollars. And there are going to be places like Cripple Creek, Colorado is a great gold mine for gold miners, but it's also a source of tellurium where most of the gold was held. And that was thrown away for 100+ years, 150 years been thrown away. But if it doesn't make economic sense, sometimes that stuff goes to the smelter, you get penalized for those kind of metals. So you got to be looking at how do you recover it at the mine site so you don't end up either giving it to the smelter so they sell it, and that's happened, or they simply penalize you for what you do send in. So it's got to be a dollar-driven decision.
I can just jump in on that, DoD mentioned they had a lot of bucks. So, I mean, there's a source
Yeah, yeah.
of dollars
Yeah.
to address, right? And a case in point, and it's fairly recent, there's a product called red mud. It's a product of aluminum processing. And Rio Tinto, is, a big player in the aluminum business, and they spend a lot of research dollars to figure out how to get the element scandium out of it. And they've been successful. It took a lot of effort and a lot of time. But that was a waste product. Red mud is a waste product. And so there are lots of opportunities, and especially that's where the money needs to be directed for what I call the minor metals, the things you don't go mine for, but are in there. We need big research dollars on that. For the major metals, just get the permitting process straightened out.
We already have a precedent set in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve conceptually. Why wouldn't it be worth the Congress's evaluation to consider the merits of strategic mineral, similar to what the federal government's into with strategic petroleum?
You mean in terms of essentially sequestering?
Stockpiling
areas?
it, of course.
You could stockpile, but you still have to find them first. And that's really where we are right now. No, there's truth in that too. One of the things we haven't shown here, one of the things that we haven't shown here is the land status map that basically a great deal of the highest potential land are closed to mineral entry. That's something we got to revisit. I feel very strongly about that.
But I want to jump in there too, just to follow up on these projects and the comment that a lot of the land is off limits to mining, but also that each project is unique. You know, each mineral deposit has a unique set of needs to put it into production based on its location, based on its metallurgy, based on its mineral complex, based on a lot of technical factors, but also then what the land status is. If you find the deposit on Forest Service land or BLM land or state land or mental health trust land or native corporation land, that presents a whole other unique set of circumstances for getting something into production. And then you've got the host community. And it depends, you know, how far you are from a community. Some of them are super rural, remote. Some of them are closer to cities, and that presents another unique set of factors. So it's really difficult in the exploration industry to give an answer of, you know, what's going to solve this problem, what's going to put something into production, because it's not a cookie cutter type situation. There's not been any single deposit or project that I've worked on in any jurisdiction that's the same as the other. So one approach might be to take, you know, each individual project that maybe has some critical mineral inclusions in them and look at, well, what's going to be the customized approach to help that one get into production? And what's going to be the customized approach to get this other one into production? Because they're all different. And I wish it were simpler, but it's complicated. It's complex. It requires people to take the time to learn the differences between each project and each location to find the solutions to move it forward. And that takes a lot of people. It takes a lot of discussions, and it takes time and people dedicated to that path to really move things forward. So that's one thing I think to keep in mind with, you know, creating this plan to help Alaska be part of this critical mineral transition, is that some things do need to be customized because of the unique characteristics based on geology, geography, and the human aspects of it.
So Senator, we did have a strategic reserve that we put in place in 2011 or something whatnot, and then the Pentagon emptied it and sold it. So we need to double down on that and reinvigorate that. I totally agree. And we actually need to probably triple down on it and start creating that market. I guess one question I have is, we know what the critical minerals are now, but given the lead time for putting mines in place, we don't know what the critical minerals are going to be in 3 years or 5 years. So when we realize that lithium is unobtainium because there's not enough of it to make those batteries, we're going to make batteries out of something else, and then that's going to be critical mineral. So how do we think about that as we're going forward? So in the DOE, from the DOE side, we're building the capabilities to make those pivots and rapidly deploy technologies that'll let us access those. But how do we do that from thinking about that when we're thinking about projects and thinking about the resource in the ground in the beginning?
I'll take a little cut and then you guys. Yeah, that's a really good question because we don't know. And so then it's back to investment, and you're going to go with what you think as industry to make money. And those are the main metals. So again, short of some sort of incentive for potential metals, you know, it's tough. The other part of it is in the zinc industry, they had a big scare when the F-150s were going to go to all aluminum boxes and stuff, you know. I mean, that was a big scare for the zinc industry. So substitution is the other risk. As prices get too high, people find that out, another metal. So.
Yeah, that's a conversation we've had as a panel, you know, focusing on the meat and potatoes type deposits. And then, you know, your garnishes might change in 20 years. And, you know, 20 years ago, we couldn't have predicted what the world looked like today. And certainly COVID in Ukraine has changed things very dramatically in a short period of time again. And what's going to happen 20 years from now, if the lead time, you know, to find a deposit and put it into production is now looking plus 20 years, we can't predict these changes. And so from a market standpoint, you know, some of these meat and potatoes deposits are always attractive, you know, historically have been attractive and have that longer perspective.
You know, it could just make me think though, because there's several deposits around the world in Alaska right now. So the importance is good data. You take core, preserve it. That's probably one answer. Because then look at all the deposits people are going back and analyzing for lithium or scandium or whatever, you know, and it was always just gold or uranium before. So maybe that's one answer.
We certainly take my hat off to the state and USGS for saving those little pieces, pulps, we call them, little bits of soil sample and rock sample. For, everybody thought they were completely crazy, saved them for 50 years. Today, we heard they're going back and reanalyzing those with much better detection limit equipment. And we'll be out looking for those based on that data. So that data, rocks never get old. They were already old when you picked them up.
Land status, you guys mentioned, for instance, the national parks and getting those national parks mapped, especially by DOD, and military lands that are currently closed. But one of the problems we also have since statehood, any federal mining claim that has been dropped, any federal survey, for instance, mineral patents that the president didn't actually sign over the patent. That land, even though it looks like it's state land, it's within the state tentative approval for patent. There's those holes, and they seem to be very effective at stopping permitting. You contact Department of Natural Resources on some of these excluded areas to find out what they are. You chase them back. It's an old U.S. mineral survey that was not completed. These and another thing, both the state and the U.S. government, they stayed off of those federal mining claims. They didn't take any samples on those old federal mining claims and U.S. mineral surveys. So we have no current geochem data on those lands. It'd be great to take a look at those holes in state land.
Yeah, thanks,
I think-
Ron. We'll put that in the plan. So I think we're trying to keep, we have one question and then we'll just go quick down and boom.
Yeah, anyone in the crowd can also answer to this. With climate change, melting glaciers, and overfishing of key species, mining has generated a pessimistic idea that it will further worsen the ecological situation. What can be said to the public that claim mining is going to destroy Alaska's delicate ecosystem, and what initiatives are being done to reduce pollution and keeps Alaska's at gold standard?
I think as we heard this morning, we are the gold standard. We do it better than anybody in the world. And that's because we all care about this place. I became a geologist. We all became geologists because we like the outdoors. And that's why we feel very passionate about the business that we're in. We can't meet the objectives of net zero climate change initiatives without mining. I think, but people don't understand that. They haven't connected the dots on that. We see it time and time again. So I just think we have to go through a huge education process. I think Alaska Resource Education does a great job, ARE, Becky and the whole team over there, of educating our young kids. We've all participated in that. It's a great experience to do. But when they go home and they talk to their parents and where they read in the paper that there's, mining's evil. I mean, we've been dealing with this for a long, long time, and that we have a re-education process to go through here, I think. And I'd like to see the state and maybe the federal government team up to put $10 million to work on a marketing campaign of education to basically educate the people, everybody, but really the young people, because they're the ones who are going to live with this for the long term. Social media, we get our butts kicked in social media every time we go permitting. Every time we're talking about permitting anything, and there's so much misinformation out there. We spend all this time doing an EIS, and then nobody bothers to read the damn thing, because when we go and answer questions to the public, it's not about what's in the EIS. They have an opinion, and you say, well, wait a minute, but that we addressed that in the EIS. Build the road somewhere else. Well, we addressed why we can't build a road somewhere else, why that doesn't make any more sense, or why that actually impacts caribou more. But That's the education piece that's really missing, and it's gonna take dollars to address it. And I think it's not a little bit of money. It's
Rick?
gonna be a significant amount of money.
I'll up them 20 million. Was there another
Heard
question?
it here
Are
first.
we're good. Okay,
We decided we'd take it up at the reception.
okay. I know
Wait,
we're,
just
now we've,
kidding, Just
oh,
kidding,
okay.
just kidding.
He's got dibs on questions.
Yeah,
Well-
excellent, Roger.
He gets 90.
This has been a great get together and I'm looking forward to tomorrow. The one thing that I cannot understand is, and Frank Markowski brought that point out, is we have the resources. And why the hell should we buy them from the Congo or some other area where they have no environmental restrictions when we could be producing the product and give people jobs, and instead of having to buy product from other nations, we would have our own. And I don't know how to get the message across to the people. The same thing's happening with oil. I mean, what's going on is just plain crazy. And I have a real concern to what's going to happen in the years ahead. We're self-destructing the way I look at it. And if we don't get our act together and get our congressmen and our executive branch to work together, we're in a world of hurt. So you all know about this, but I just, as I said, I'm 90 years old. I got 10 more years. I should care less about what's going on. I've lost 2 kids already. I only have 1 more. But I want to see this country retain its freedom. Now, I just talked to a friend of mine that is working in Singapore. And just before he left, there was some young person that brought in some drugs. Well, guess what happened to him? He got arrested and he got killed. So do we want that type of society? And we're heading for either becoming a fascist country or socialist. And there's too much difference between the two. But we need to take a good look. And with this election that's coming up, God forbid, I hope that our people in this country pull together and realize the importance of the election. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger.
Roger.
Well, with that, all right, that's it. We're all advocating for a plan.
Okay, let's thank our panel. Thank you very much.